as well. And thank you so much, Elvis Costello, for joining us today. I am
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
beyond excited to speak with you. I have fallen so in love with this new album, having spent the last 48 hours with The Boy Named If. But to give you some context, if you don't mind, I want to go back and let you know that we've met before, and it was really quite a long time ago. But I was just a young DJ, and I don't know if you can see this or not,
Oh my goodness.
but there we are.
Wow.
Uh,
That looks
And I,
really, ooh, I would say that might be, that's 1980, WLIR.
that's
Oh
correct.
yeah.
Yeah, I
So
think it was.
yeah, that would be like maybe Trust or even like Imperial Bedroom sort of time, judging from the
Yeah,
photos.
or it might have been right after Armed Forces, perhaps.
Oh, really that early? Yeah.
You came to
Yeah.
the station. I remember Jim Del Bazo brought you by,
Oh
and
dear Jim. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, Jim was such a good friend, and from when we worked together when he was at Columbia, and then when he went back there after the time he was at MTV, and he actually, he worked with Burt Bacharach. He actually represented me in England, in America for a little while. Um, that was a terrible thing to lose him so young, and his I'm still in touch with his family. I was talking to his daughter not very long ago, and Mary Beth. That's one of those things in the last few years that's been tough, particularly when it's people that are younger than you. I think
he
he
was a good
was.
friend of mine as well. He played third base on our softball team. So,
Oh right, yeah, yeah. Well, we have to keep people in our hearts. Unfortunately, these things have happened. They've happened more regularly. Maybe there was a secret they kept from us when we were younger that it would turn up. But when it's people who are approximately your own age or even younger, it's all the more shocking. Um, yeah,
you
there's
came
a
up
lot going on.
to the station that day, and I will remember this as being a pivotal point in my musical tastes. Being around you that day, you came up and you had a stack of records. It was a station takeover. And I remember asking you what you wanted to play first. And you handed me a record by a mother daughter combo that you were enamored with at the time. And that was the Judds.
Yeah, that was John Deere Tractor. Yeah, little did I know where that would lead. But no, see, that's a little later. That is 80s because they were not around in 79. Uh, but I always kept trying to keep an ear out. I think it's harder now because there's so much music and it's flowing by so swiftly in the stream that the stations that play music determinedly rather than just in response to the desires of the advertisers are all the more valuable. And those record shops that remain open and curated to some degree are also places I love to go. I was just in one in the on the main on the street in Liverpool where my mother was born. I found a vinyl store, and the name of the store was Defend Vinyl, and you kind of went, "All right, I've come to the right address. Defend
Uh-huh.
Vinyl, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right." Because if you don't hold something at the center of the story, if you don't hold on to something, it's all going to float away, and you won't know what's good and bad. At the same time, I'm sure you have the experience of hearing things by chance because somebody sends you a link to something, and then you have access to a whole world of music you didn't even know was happening. So I like both. I don't think you should have to choose. I think clearly with this record, I made a central object of an album, and then wrote a storybook. If people were curious to know more about the stories in these songs, they could read some short stories, see some illustrations, hold a physical book in their hand, and all of that isn't saying that's superior to just happening upon any one of the songs on a radio playlist or somebody's own personal streaming playlist. All of those things are good. If you get to the music, that's all that matters.
Let's talk a little bit about The Boy Named If. It's out on January 14th.
Mm-hmm.
The title track, there's something very ominous about this character. Can you speak a little bit about the concept overall?
Well, I know people that had literally had an imaginary friend. I think I get it because I didn't have one myself. It always unnerved me a little bit. A little, I have twin boys of 15, and I waited for them to be talking in this language that some people report twins spontaneously communicate in. Our boys only ever did that for one day and then didn't do it again. And I was sort of relieved because there are some things about childhood that are unnerving, which is why people make stories like The Bad Seed and, The Village of the Damned and such things. These all come, they're some kind of scare story about otherness. And being a child is certainly very otherly. There are many terrifying things in so called fairy tales or children's stories like Grimm's are mostly about infant mortality. Anderson's fairy stories or fables are mostly expressions of emotional distress, sexual frustration, but they're couched in the terms of a children's story. I don't think there's anything disjointed about writing about the departure from childhood into adulthood, which these songs and this song in particular mentions, and making it into a rock and roll record. That seems like a very logical kind of way to express it. To me, that's my view. Um,
Is this boy named If someone we should be frightened of? There's a lyric
Possibly.
in the song where you say, "We'll fill up our pockets with sand," which for me sort of evoked Virginia Woolf's demise.
I hadn't thought of that. I was thinking more. Actually, the chorus becomes quite fantastic. The music has a more sense of wonder and fantasy about it than the verses, which juxtapose innocence and ominous sort of versions of the boy named If as he gets older as the song goes on. It isn't all happening chronologically. It jumps about. It talks about childhood mishaps, about danger, about I won't be dashed to pieces if I jump from here, because children sort of believe themselves invulnerable. They also have an unself consciousness about celebration, about singing and dancing and skipping, and you're sort of frightened out of that when you're told to be uniform, stand in line, don't speak, learn algebra, suppress your desires, work for the bank, whatever it is, work for something. Want to go to university so you can go spend 3 years learning things you don't understand to come out and there's no job for you at the end. Whatever it is, it's always get in line, and there's no get in line in childhood. Well, there is, but quite often you can't do that. There's something in you that says no, I shouldn't walk like this. I should walk like this, and you're flinging yourself around. Um, as it gets older, it becomes to be like an alibi for all your bad behavior. That's less endearing, isn't it? But there's definitely a sinister side to all this. Think about not so much. I'm not much on books. I don't read a lot. I never did. But I know stories because I've absorbed them from various sources. And so I know there's that book like Turn of the Screw by Henry James. But really, the way I absorb that story is from the movie with Deborah Carr, The Innocents. That's still the most frightening movie I know. And it is the idea of these possessed or possibly deceased children. Um, that's all involved in this story as well,
That is fascinating to me that you say that you're not particularly well read for one of the finest wordsmiths of my or many other generations. To me, there are some songs on this new album that evoke some of your finest work from the past, like particularly the first single, Magnificent Hurt, which sounds like it could have maybe come right off of this year's model. Was this sonically something you were striving for, or
No, it's just the way I started playing. I mean, just like in the original, I didn't have any ancestor for that record except the records I love by other people. I didn't, I mean, this year's model didn't sound an awful lot like My Aim Is True. My Aim Is True was played with a group of, a very, very accomplished band of Marin County. I don't think they would be embarrassed by saying hippies. They were kind of were. They were Marin County kind of,
oh,
bohemians, say.
Mm.
They were a mixture of personalities. Great John McPhee on guitar, you know, and Johnny Shamboli, the late Johnny Shamboli. And I was incredibly fortunate to have them as my accompanist on that first record. The first time I was ever seriously in a recording studio, to have people that could play much better than me. I mean, having people who play much better than me is a continuing theme of my career. You know, even when I had the Attractions, I would say I was the least accomplished instrumentalist in that band, but somehow it held together. And recently, of course, we went back and listened to those backing tracks, because we were in the process of making Spanish Model, this remix where we took my voice out and put these Latin singers who were kind enough to come and take on the job of adapting my words into Spanish and singing it in all sorts of different styles of voice. Now, I don't think it had any influence on the writing of this record, but the means with which I came to these songs was very much the same as the means with which I came to those songs all that time ago. Pick up the guitar and start singing, and something begins to happen. Some things you're thinking about tumble out, and they suddenly they're on the page in some kind of order. When you write at the piano, I find when I write at the piano, I find often the possibilities of harmony are greater because it's all there in front of you. Bear in mind the guitar faces away from you. So you're not looking at your hands a lot of the time. You're following the rhythm that's in your mind, usually with some sort of lyrical thread that you're trying to represent. So when I sit at the piano, you might write a song like The Whirlwind, or I Do, you know, from the last record, Hey Clockface. They're two of the best ballads I've written that I would put up there with Almost Blue, or I Want to Vanish, or Still from North. You know, tunes that I feel like could only exist on the piano. But when you've got the guitar in your hands, the words are tumbling out, and they carried out along in a kind of rhythm of which is perhaps more energetic sometimes. And before I had time to really have a second guess about what all this meant, Pete Thomas was kind of knocking on my door saying, I'm down in my basement with my Gretsch drum kit. I'm fed up playing along with all our records and trying to keep myself ready to go when we can get back out on the stage. I can't play along with any more Motown records. I've been right through the Beatles catalog, all of Stax. What do I do next? I said, how about this? Sent him, I don't even remember which song. You know, just this microphone, my guitar, I can't remember whether it was electric or acoustic, all on one track, and sent it to him. And an hour later, the track came back to me with the drums in place. And I went, okay, now I know how the electric guitar goes. I did the good electric guitar part, sent it back to him, and then maybe he said, oh, I think I should change the pattern in the bridge. You know, so just like we were arranging it anytime, except the other two members of the band were not involved. So we were really the rhythm section for those first exchanges, and we quickly sent it to Davey, sent it to Steve, who promptly complained that we'd finished the track without him. And then I said, no, I don't think so. I think you'll find there's lots of things to play. They might not be the thing you would have played if we'd all been together, but maybe that'll be good. And sure enough, you know, you listen to where he sits in some of these songs, it's a little different, and you can't quite work out why. But I think right in that song you mentioned, you know, Davey and I are laying down the figure, and Steve's playing the accent. He's playing the answer. He would normally do that. If we were all started together, he would have been leading. So right there's a difference in the way and that's a simple form of music, isn't it? That's, as you said, it reminds you of something you heard, but you didn't hear it before because we just wrote it, or I just wrote it. And, you know, it takes off into a melodic chorus. It has a guitar solo that's suitably crooked. You know, I felt it shouldn't have a pretty solo on it. Steve kind of got inside those lines and played some harmony, which I thought was very ingenious. And next thing we had a record, you know, and just we did that 12 more times.
It has been an incredibly productive period for you these last couple of years, and not only is this new album arriving on January 14th, but there was the Armed Forces special edition that came out, the Spanish version of this year's model, as you mentioned, and there's a book at audible.com
Yeah,
called How to Play Guitar and Why.
yeah. That's kind of a comic, sort of philosophical look at the the you know the idea of playing the guitar for pleasure, and allowing your own curiosity to carry you into however much music you feel you need to get at your command or even to understand. But there are certain routes through which you're only going to reach a frustrating barrier. And I was trying to tell the story of how, with reference to my own experiences, how how you could maybe have the joy of playing simple songs. And if you can play simple songs, you might want to play more complicated songs. It's up to you after a certain point. I can only open the door and say, push you through. Here it is. The key of G. Don't start in C, because that next chord you're going to play is F, and it's nearly impossible. And that's why the world is full of murderers, because those murderers used to be guitar players that got so frustrated at trying to play the chord of F that they ended up taking to a life of mayhem and terror. That's why there are dictators in the world. They're
Uh,
all former guitar players.
does next year mark the 40th anniversary of Imperial Bedroom? Are there plans afoot for the same kind of treatment for that record?
You know, I'm not a great one on anniversaries. I mean, I think birthdays and wedding anniversaries are the ones you note, because the day you came into this world should be something to be thankful for. If you're with somebody, you want to remember the joy of that day, or hopefully, you know. For most people, that's a joyful occasion. The birthdays of your children and your parents can be joyful or melancholy, depending on whether they're with you. But anniversaries of creative acts don't really intrigue me that much. They're sort of marketing men's ideas of how to resell a story. I don't think of music in that way. I mean, we did a tour in which we played the Imperial Bedroom repertoire, or as
I
much
saw
of
it
it as we could. Um,
at the Warner
but it
Theater.
was called Imperial Bedroom and Other Chambers because I always felt like that record led to some other adventures. In fact, you could trace it backwards to some of the songs that were on Trust. You could trace it forward to some of the songs I wrote with Burt Bacharach, because the form of song and eventually led to the record Look Now, which was, was a kind of approach to arranging that I suppose I first investigated along with the attractions on Imperial Bedroom. But I just wanted to celebrate all those connections on that tour. And for the first time, I had the personnel to do it. We had two wonderful singers with us, and Davey Farragher, who, unlike the attractions, is a really good singer. You know, Steve can sing some haze and things, but he's not a harmony vocalist like Davey is. And we could actually play those songs really coherently, whereas the attractions attempt to play those songs live was often very anxious, shall we say. You know, it was in a different time where live approach was anxious for various reasons. And, you know, the tempos were always a little too fast, and some of the kind of nuances of the record got smeared over by live excitement. And some of that excitement was great, and some of it was just incoherent. So to do it again was really exciting, but I don't. I'm sure at some point somebody will want to make something out of Imperial Bedroom as the one that we're working on is actually a collection which celebrates my collaboration with Burt Bacharach,
Mhm.
which I don't know is how many years ago, but it's not really on a commonly celebrated anniversary. I think Painted from Memory began in the writing and recording of God Give Me Strength in 1995, and then the record was 1998, 99, and we continued to write songs together. And we were in the studio 2 months ago recording with a 30-piece orchestra. So, you know, how incredible to say that it's an ongoing collaboration with one of the great composers of all time, who just, by the way, happens to be 93. So I'm very lucky to even know him and to have learned everything I did and to have written the songs that we wrote together. Now that's something to sing about. That I will put in a box and or whatever kind of presentation it is and offer it to people next year. I don't know which other records merit that kind of attention. For one thing, there are so many more songs that you don't know about that we wrote. You know, even though we recorded some on Look Now, there are still more songs written by Burt Bacharach and myself that people haven't heard.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think that would be a good thing to do to make them available.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, I must tell you, Imperial Bedroom is such an important record in my life, and I think one of the reasons why I've enjoyed The Boy If so much is there seems to be sort of a certain cohesion between the songs on Imperial Bedroom, and you feel like you're
Oh, no doubt.
along a
Yeah.
journey from start to finish. And I got that same sense with The Boy If. I love My Most Beautiful Mistake, which is a track that I think features Nicole Atkins.
Yeah, she did such a great job. It's a very unusual assignment to ask somebody to play the sense of somebody rather than literally be in a duet where you take lines alternately. I could have done it like that, but I didn't sense that was the most original way to tell that story. I just wanted to, and, it is about a conversation between this screenwriter and a woman waiting on his table. He's telling lies to himself and then to her, and she's heard those lies before. So
Very visual.
Nicole has a pretty good delivery,
Yes.
in her own songs. I didn't know her work until a little while ago, and sent her the lyric and sort of, she seemed to understand the story, and then I suggested that she play that role, that voice. It's kind of like a character um, actor part, really, to come in and out of the story, and she gets one line to deliver on her own that's
Yes.
pretty deadly. And
Very powerful.
yeah, and it is a little bit of a mystery story. You can't really tell whether this it's all leading to some terrible crime, or whether this is just a dance these two people are having around one another, or whether the whole thing is actually happening in a film. That it could actually all be a scene in a movie. I leave it up to the listener to decide which version of the ending. It's like almost a song, like one of those books where you get to choose the ending.
Uh-huh.
And
Yes.
I figured, well, there was place for one of those tales in among all these other songs.
And
And
then
it's the only outside contribution from the band. Everything else is played from within the band.
the band sounds absolutely stellar. There's another track, another favorite, Trick Out the Truth, which not only manages to mention the Marx Brothers, but there's an allusion to Lydia the Tattooed Lady. I don't think I've heard Groucho Harpo Chico mentioned since on a record
And Carl,
anyway, since
that one
Ian
on
Dury's
Yellow, yeah,
Ian Dury had a song called Reasons to Be Cheerful that
yeah,
mentioned the Marx Brothers, but
yeah. Lydia. Have you seen Lydia? And
Lydia,
yeah, there's lots of great couplets in that lyric. Harry Ruby.
it's got a
But
bit of a cabaret feel to it, that track.
well, that one, there's a couple that have that um, allude to that form of music. You got to remember that all that music was in my childhood, and therefore Pete's, and to some extent Steve's. He's a little younger than us. I think he probably, by the time he had control of the radio dial, there was just like a kind of version of American radio that with an English accent. When I was a kid, you could turn on the radio, and for all intents and purposes, it could have been 1935. There were still the same personalities that had been singing and making jokes during the war. A lot of them were still on the radio. There were a lot of people who had come out of music hall, which is the English form of vaudeville. So a lot of the entertainers were had, their knowledge of music was based on soft shoe, type of like routines and things like that. That weren't there wasn't a lot of jazz in the mainstream of music, but there was dance bands that kind of were modeled on Glenn Miller, like the one my dad sang with. And if you look at old clips of the Beatles, you'll see them pop up on these variety shows. There wasn't the equivalent of the Ed Sullivan show where Elvis or the Beatles could appear like in a shocking realization. You had these kind of genial agreements between a couple of comedians whose origins were in musical, who now had a television show which was very, very popular. And the Beatles would come on probably as fans of those comedians and play along with the gags, and they'd even do a song together. There's a clip of the Beatles doing Moonlight Bay. I was along on Moonlight Bay. You wouldn't really expect them to know that song, but of course they do, because you can tell from Honey Pie and Your Mother Will Know and other songs Paul McCartney wrote that They were steeped in all that. That was what was going on. And then rock and roll came and kicked that all over. And the beat group version of that in the early 60s, which I responded to, given that I grew up in a house full of jazz and vocal music, I didn't hear any rock and roll in the 50s. I was too young. Um, my first, knowledge of Little Richard was Paul McCartney singing Long Tall Sally. I
Uh-huh.
sort of knew there was a Little Richard, but he didn't appear very often in England. He'd pop up now and again on TV, and you go, "Who the hell's that?" But we didn't have access to that. Elvis was in the movies by the time I noticed him. I never had the thrill of hearing him when he was like first available. I was born the same year as he started recording. He was in the army by the time I even knew his name, which was kind of to a lot of people when he stopped being interesting.
Speaking of the movies and the Beatles, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you. I saw you attended the premiere of Peter Jackson's "Let It Be" documentary,
I did see that screening, yeah, that premiere screening
the screening.
presentation, which was just, was pretty
Well, so,
sad.
what did you take away from that? And seeing some footage that many of us had never seen before, uh, were
Well,
you as mesmerized?
I tell you, the most curious experience for me was I was straight off a plane from San Francisco that morning, so I was incredibly kind of high like I'm suddenly in a crowd, which I have to say was a lot sort of less guarded, shall we say, than it had been in America. And I'm in a crowd full of faces of people I know. People like Chrissy Hine were there, and other people that I've known down the years, people I've never met before or claimed to have never met me, like Noel Gallagher, who I think was there taking notes. It'll probably turn up on the next Oasis record, and whatever it was he was there doing, God bless him. But I'm there watching this thing and remembering that the previous time I'd been to the pictures, as we say in England, the movies, in that part of London, Leicester Square, where there used to be a lot of theatres and dance halls in the 60s and 50s, was to see Let It Be in 1970. I went to see it with my father, and I remember that because my father was a night worker. He was singing in a dance hall every night. So we never went to the movies together. And that's the only time I ever went with him. One
Hmm.
Saturday afternoon, he had already recorded The Long and Winding Road under an assumed name, and it had a minor hit in Australia with it. So he had a vested interest in seeing the film. And I remember us both coming out being really depressed because it was such a sad film with them
Uh-huh.
all fighting. And, yeah, even the bit at the end where they got, away and play the show on the roof. It wasn't like, it didn't seem like a coherent thing at the time. It just seemed like a little bit of desperate, fuck you to the police. Um, but here we are, in the theatre watching it on this giant screen, and Peter Jackson, who made probably one of the most, really one of the most beautiful and sad films in the whole history of cinema, that film about the First World War. If you've seen that, they will not grow old. He used techniques of cinematic restoration to reinforce the humanity of the soldiers who fought in the First World War. And here he is using those same techniques to give us a sense of joy and
Yes.
celebration. And the whole goofiness of the Beatles kind of trying to make this strange assignment. And even stranger is like, I literally, where I used to go to church was next door to Twickenham Studios, like 2 minutes from the door of Twickenham Studios. So that was right in my neighborhood in my childhood. And I remember all the girls in the area being so excited when the Beatles were up there shooting Hard Day's Night. And
Mhm.
my mother coming home from work and saying, "Oh, the girls in the office were all hanging out the window because Ringo was filming that scene on the towpath just below where we were working. Everybody was crazy." And it seemed, like we were in Hollywood and we're just in this West London suburb and the Beatles are filming just up the street. Well, do you know what? I never remember anybody noticing they were there during Let It Be because all of that heat had gone out of the story. And they were up there just secretly. They must have just crept in there and nobody knew.
Mhm.
The first we knew they'd ever been there was when the film came out, and then the film was really sad. So I'm really thankful to Peter Jackson. I'm thankful to everybody that made that for like letting us see that it wasn't bleak on every day. Yeah, they may have had
Mhm.
their squat scraps, but who doesn't do
Yeah.
that in the studio?
Yeah. When
And
George
it's
suggests,
incredibly reassuring to anybody that plays and is trying to write a song to see the greatest group in the world doing the same things we all do, singing and trying to make something happen, even when you don't even know the words. You know the tune, but you don't know the words. That's exactly where we started this conversation.
Mhm,
So, you
mhm.
know, I'm very
So
grateful to Peter Jackson for telling us that tale now, and the whole thing's just a beautiful thing.
your friend and sometime collaborator, Paul McCartney. Did you have any questions for him after that that you might have
He was,
asked him? What?
I don't want to say, you know, it's not, I don't want to repeat a private conversation, but we did spend a really decent amount of time in the party afterwards with him, Diana and myself. And what was most moving to me was the evident joy he had in this, in seeing everybody come out of that kind of elated. I think that he was quite, you know, affected by that. And Mary McCartney, his daughter, who, you know, I've known, I have to say, since she was a teenager, but she and Diana are very good friends, and she has photographed both of us and is a wonderful photographer like her mother. Hearing her kind of celebrate that, and also you have to think those are real people, right? Those people, they're kind of our famous heroes in the pop music world, but they're also people, and they're young men as well. And you see them, they are a group of teenage friends that went to outer space. They went like astronauts or something into this incredible journey, which we all observed, but we weren't in control of. They weren't in control of a lot of the time. And what that movie represents is their determination to be each to themselves their own person, as much as they were clearly trying to work together. You also see, if you were to think of what it might have been to be the children of those people, like somebody like Mary or Giles Martin, who took care of the remix of the music, that's his father's work as well, isn't it? It's,
Mhm.
you know, it was very moving to see that because they are seeing those people in a great moment, which prior to this has been thought to be a, a moment of dissolution and disagreement, but now is revealed to be just a day when it was like that, and another day when it was something else entirely. And I think they, all in their own way, have their own beauty. And I felt lucky to witness that. Just both on the screen and the little few minutes that I spent watching that particular set of exchanges. I'm very happy for all of those people that account because they are, after all is said and done, they're people the same as all of us. They're not up on some shelf somewhere, you know. That's
I think among one of your many talents is your ability to actually talk to musicians. And your TV show that was it 2008 that Spectacle
You know,
aired.
I can't recall what year it was, but it was around then. Yes, we did a
Yeah.
couple of seasons, so I'm not sure which year that which was in. I know they were all, it was all compressed into a very small period of time. So sometimes we'd be shooting two a day, like as they sometimes do with television. So, you know, literally Smokey Robinson in the afternoon and the police in the evening. I mean, that's, you know, you need another head. You know, can I put the different head on? You know, there was quite a lot involved in it, and I had tremendous colleagues in that: Bill Flanagan, Alex Coletti, and of course Elton John and David Furnish, who were the executive producers, were the people who were responsible for getting the circumstances in which the television companies and broadcasters were felt willing to let me do that. Even, you know, they persuaded them that I could do it. You know,
You think your prowess as an interviewer might have uh, grown out of the fact that you've probably been exposed to a lot of bad interviews in your career?
I don't know whether I'm any better. When I look at it, I think sometimes my anxiety to get on with the story sometimes made me intervene when I shouldn't have done. But I do think that some of the artists were more at ease because they knew I did essentially the same job as them. Even Renee Fleming, the opera singer. I mean, I go onto the stage and I try and tell a story with words and music. Now, her style of singing and her style of music is radically different to mine, but we still understand that the basic assignment is somewhat the same. I know people who have interviewed Lou Reed. I have friends who are writers and had a very difficult time talking to him. He was
Mhm.
famously not at ease with being asked questions. And for whatever reason, he evidently was in that conversation. And I think, sadly, even this little time afterwards, you look at that collection of programs and you go, Levon Helm, Alan Toussaint, Lou Reed, Kate McGarrigle,
It was great.
Jesse Winchester. There's several that we don't have the opportunity to talk to now. So I'm very glad that I got those, not just those conversations, but the performances, and even the fun that we had playing other people's songs as a way by way of introduction. The Imposters and I, in some cases, other ensembles that we put together. I think with James Burton and Alan Toussaint playing in a band together, I never thought I'd see that. It was
Yeah,
kind of fantastic.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It was, and too short
yeah,
lived.
we were let loose, and a lot of it was informed. I wouldn't say we did the same job, but it was informed by a show my friend Hal Wilner made for NBC in the 80s. He was the musical intelligence behind a show called Night Music, which was hosted by David Sanborn and Jules Holland. That was made briefly for NBC. It's sort of one of these things where you can't believe it happened. And I think the scope of that show was even bolder than Spectacle, because you would have things like Leonard Cohen singing Who by Fire with Sonny Rollins playing behind him, Al Green and Sun Ra together. These were things that existed in Hal's imagination, and he was an incredible record producer, but also the man responsible for the underscore music, the source music on SNL. So whenever like a piece of curious sci-fi music would appear in a skit, that would be Hal's library that he did. So he was contributing all the time through different medium, and I took a lot from uh, being a friend of his, and got to play on shows that he put together of different music, Harry Smith Archive, and the concert in Montreal on the anniversary of Leonard Cohen's passing, where I played The Future. This was all Hal's doing. So, I mean, I keep his example in my mind and in my heart. In whenever you think there's nowhere else to go, there is always somewhere else to go.
You mentioned SNL. Have you and Lorne Michaels mended fences? Has enough water passed under the bridge from
Oh,
all
for
those
goodness
years ago?
sake! I mean, I that is all. That's all like dramatized in the retelling, like most things. Because bear in
Mhm.
mind, there were very few VCRs in those days. They were much more ubiquitous in England than they were in America. Very few people had home recorders in 1977. You actually check it out; they just weren't ubiquitous. Not every household had a way to record television programs, and there's some people that tell you that they saw that probably are thinking of the rerun that came much later, or
Mhm.
they read the account of it and feel they saw it. You're like all the people that tell you they saw the Velvet Underground, or they were at the 100 Club to see the Sex Pistols. There would have
Right,
been 100,000 people there if they'd all been
right.
there, and it holds a couple of hundred. So I was back on the show. I was back on NBC within a year and a half. So I wasn't banned from NBC. That wasn't made up. I was back on the show. I played Veronica on the show, so that would have been 89. I had a bit of a row with Lorne the next time I came on because he didn't like the way I looked. And he didn't think that I looked like myself because I'd grown a huge beard and I had long hair and I was wearing a hat, and he didn't think that was good, and had a few words with him about a few things. So we have a kind of, I don't know him very well. I mean, his good friend is Paul Simon. He has a higher class of songwriter than me to worry about. He does. And Paul, who's an incredible comedian, by the way, if you know his work in comedy, I mean that completely seriously, a really gifted comedian.
Nobody
Um,
looks better in a chicken suit than
Nobody
Paul.
looks better, and nobody could have delivered that the way he did. I mean, that is really something. And I have such admiration for him as a songwriter. So, yeah, I went there, and I was there on the 25th anniversary, and I played
Okay.
Radio with the Beastie Boys. So I don't think this is somebody holding a grudge. I sat in the audience for the 40th anniversary, which was a little bit like being at I don't know, in some like display of famous people. Like everybody in the audience was somebody famous former hosts, former cast members, former guests, an incredibly starry group. I was in the cheap seats, I have to say. I was sitting with a seat next to me that said Carey, said on a piece of paper Carey, and I thought, Archbishop Carey? I thought maybe the Archbishop of Canterbury was coming, and Mariah Carey. Maybe that'd be interesting if I'm sitting next to Mariah, you know. It turned out to be Jim Carey, but he never took his seat. He never took his seat. So I had two seats. And I had a ball. I had a ball that night. I watched it all go down. I saw all the people come and go. I went to the party afterwards, which I don't usually do. I sat with Randy Newman. I watched Paul McCartney and Taylor Swift do a number together. It was,
Uh,
you know, it was so, you know, I've had my fun on SNL, you know.
yeah. Okay.
I don't imagine they even remember I exist by now, you know. It's like,
You've been so generous with your time, and I
thank
appreciate
you.
it so much. The Boy Named If is out January 14th. I am also very excited to get a copy of the accompanying book, which is 88 pages. And it's a storybook, basically, that embellishes on some of the songs you hear on this new
Yeah,
record.
they're short stories that have the same title, so they might be the scene leading into the song, they might be in the background of the song, they might be the postscript of the song, and the drawings are these daubs that I do with an electric pencil, which some of which are absurd, some of which are macabre, some of which are funny, and they all give you something more to hold in your hand if that's what you want. You know, it's a numbered signed edition, so it's not something that everybody necessarily wants or can necessarily get, but those that get it will know they have something from me. It came, as the Beatles used to say, from me to you, came from
Yes.
inside my head, nowhere more personal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I hope you enjoy it if you do see it, and
I am
I
gonna.
will look forward to returning to Baltimore. I haven't been
Yes.
there in a little while. I had a couple of wonderful nights, three concerts, I think, with the Baltimore Symphony, and I played the Ram's Head, is it called,
Ram's Head.
with the
Uh-huh.
pickups with David Adago on guitar. So my memory of
Yeah.
my last performance, I think, in Baltimore was there
Last
with
two
a
times
band.
I saw you was at the Anthem in DC with the Blondie tour, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
prior to that, the Warner Theater. That was the Imperial Bedroom
Oh,
night.
that's all in, yeah, because you have to go sometimes to DC. We play the Warner Theatre. I like that. I like that venue plenty.
That was a
So
special night, and
yeah.
I went out into the lobby and purchased a new vinyl copy of Imperial Bedroom that night because my copy was worn out. I probably have listened to that album more than any, or as much as any record in my life. And
Thank you. I mean, you know, we really intended to make one that stuck around when we made it, and I spent a long time, I won't say alone, because I was with Jeff Emerick, which was an incredible education in being in the studio. I spent maybe 6 of the 12 weeks in the studio on my own, overdubbing and reworking the vocal arrangements and mixing it with Jeff. You know, it's not always seen that I co-produced that record with him because I wanted him to have the credit. So it said produced by Jeff Emerick from an original idea. I think like a movie credit. But you know, he was so self-effacing and such a brilliant mixer and engineer. And we all learned a tremendous amount. All the band did. We started out with the same chaotic approach to recording that we had adopted for the previous albums, and after about 10 days admitted defeat that we were just getting more and more further and further away from the songs, not closer, and started again much more deliberately and in a way that he could find the home for everything that we did. And in the end, everybody shone on that record in different ways. All of the members are probably the second best performance by the very different music. I would say that in, you know, this year's model and Imperial Bedroom are the peaks of the attractions performances. There are individual records and songs on the other albums that I like, but those are the most cohesive, even though we were often in disagreement about how to go forward. In the end, we went forward, guess what, the way I said it should be, because my name comes first. Not that my opinion is more important, but I get the blame when it goes wrong, and it didn't go
right.
wrong. You know, it
Well,
didn't go wrong
Elvis,
as you said.
Elvis Costello and the Imposters, a formidable force as well. And can't wait to see you back in our area. I know you've got a big UK tour scheduled for the new
Yeah,
year.
we're going to have some other shows to tell you about before too long, but
Good.
as you probably know, it's quite difficult to plan ahead because there's so much competition as people return to the road. There are people queuing up outside of every venue. If you want to know who those people are at the stage door, that's the bands waiting to play. It's really like that at the moment. It's quite a comical affair trying to forward plan, but we will be back. I will see you very soon.
Okay. Thank you
Okay,
so much. It's
thank you.
been a real joy.
Bye now. Bye bye.
Bye.
It was awesome.
Jesus Christ.